This is Omega Strikers. Looks simple, right?
Finally finds the airship and it goes through! The flip There's too much! It's a slaughter! The cringe crew finds the reverse sweep!
At first glance, or even several games in, Omega Strikers looks like a fun party game. However, this game has a deceptively high skill ceiling, allowing for complex gameplay and a dynamic competitive scene. Aside from complex gameplay, Omega Strikers also features a lore-rich world, compelling characters, and a unique art style. Let's meet some of the creators of this world, co-founders of Odyssey Interactive, Dax and Richard, also known as Lunchboy and Maple.
We were working at Riot Games, and both of us had been there for like 6 or 7 years.
I was like a little over 5 years.
But where we met actually was working together on TFT, where we were the leads for that game and basically built it from a small team up till the point where we shipped it, put it on multiple platforms.
It was knuckin' futz.
Yeah.
So, with a dream and a small team of dedicated gamers and developers, they left Riot Games and founded Odyssey Interactive in August of 2020. Without a set idea in mind, they started developing and testing out of Maple's basement.
And yeah, we didn't really know what we wanted to make. We just knew the types of games that we wanted to make and the type of impact that we wanted to have. And a lot of that comes down to, like, if you look at the games industry over the course of the last decade, like the number of games that have been successful that you would have predicted would become successful, most of them were completely random. And games that you think would pop off can fail for a variety of reasons. Like, there's no real predicting what the next big game will be. So for us, it was more about like a process by which we could find an idea that people thought was exciting, that we believed we could turn into something, and then kind of going that way.
The origins of Omega Strikers are a little odd. So we had probably like 10 different prototype ideas that we had written down on paper that we thought would be interesting to try.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that we ultimately ended up choosing was in our past, we worked on League of Legends, which was based on a mod in Dota, or in Warcraft 3. We worked on TFT, which was, based on a mod in Dota.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, let's like look at mods for like inspiration. So that was kind of like the foundations of what we were building. But then the more and more that we played that, it was kind of like Super Smash Brothers almost meets like League of Legends with like a hook shot component to it. The more and more that we played it, the more it felt fun in the moment, but we were like, this doesn't really feel like it has the depth or uniqueness to really stand out and be something that we're excited to make.
Mm-hmm.
So we started looking at all these different versions of it that we could build. And originally it was like a giant ball that you like had to hit with your abilities and move, and it moved pretty slowly and it would knock people away if it hit them. And we just gradually made things like faster and faster and faster and faster until the game felt like it had that kind of unique feel to it. And it was really when we got to that point that we were excited to try and like actually build this game.
Project P, as it was known back then, went into its first playtest in December of 2020, only a few months after the founding of Odyssey Interactive. The first playtest was a small local playtest at the University of Waterloo, and was met with resoundingly positive feedback, and even players excitedly asking when the next playtest would be.
Talk about like igniting the competitive spirit of the next generation of gamers. Like, when we were younger, like most of the people at the studio were competitive in one game or another. Some of us in multiple games, and it was like games played such a huge part in like our childhood growing up. On the competitive side, that for us, it's like, we view this as like, maybe it's our chance to kind of like give back and bring some of those experiences to like that younger generation. And seeing that passion kind of come out for Omega Strikers just gave us like this, it was I think humbling, maybe cliche, but it was awesome. It was really freaking cool to see, even as like there was a decline in playership, that like there was an increase in viewership, kind of like event over event and tournament over tournament that was being run. So it was like, we wish that we could have done more to help that grow by growing the game, but that's really like how we help, is like we can help throw better events, but like the events ultimately won't be the difference maker. They'll feel really good for people that are already here, but the biggest way that we help like a competitive scene grow is by like pushing the game further.
With some of the developers' worries alleviated, they would continue to work on Project P until the first public playtest in April of 2021. The following month, Odyssey Interactive started to expand, posting openings for a variety of roles. Odyssey would continue to grow until August of 2022 when the first open beta would start, introducing Omega Strikers to the world with a bang. The open beta started off with a whopping 20,000 players trying out the game. It had evolved from a simple hook-based deathmatch game into a fast-paced strategic sports arena game, featuring amazing music, unique art, an unlockable power-up system called trainings, all complementing the exciting gameplay of 2 teams of 3 trying to get the yellow hockey puck, known as the core, into the enemy goal. A large part of this explosive opening of the open beta was the Creator Versus event. This event had dozens of well-known content creators compete to get their own in-game cosmetics and skins made, and even a percentage of revenue from the first season of the game. This created a large amount of interest in the game and made for some exciting moments, such as seeing Charlie, also known as Moist Critical, face off against the country of Brazil. The open beta came to a close in December of 2022, with Moist Critical being crowned the winner of the Versus event. The game would then become inaccessible for an entire 4 months until April of 2023. Even though no one was able to play the game during this time, Omega Strikers was still talked about, largely in part due to the likable characters and the amazing lore of the game.
When we were creating the characters in Omega Strikers, we had 3 kind of principles that we wanted to hold to. The first one is that we wanted the characters to feel aspirational. So that's that, quality that you get when you play like a champion in League of Legends, and everything from the way that they play in game to the way that they look seems to sell you this like fantasy of, like it would be so cool to be Juliet. Like I know what Juliet's all about, and she's just like a larger than life version of the second pillar, which was we wanted characters to feel relatable. We wanted characters to feel like they were, they have personality attributes of characters that exist in your actual life, your friends, your family, yourself. The third quality was that we wanted to be something like Genshin meets Overwatch, where we have that kind of like, at the studio, a lot of us are big weeps. So we like the anime aesthetic a lot. And we love what MiHoYo, particularly with Genshin, and then, in the future, ZZZ are going to do with that aesthetic. And so we wanted to take that, but we wanted to do it to like a much broader cast of characters than was possible in something like Genshin, So we wanted to have an 8-foot tall hamster who weighs 2 tons running alongside a normal human like Juliet. I think that those are really the 3 things we wanted. The character fantasies needed to feel super aspirational. The character identities needed to feel really relatable. And then there needed to be a pretty broad kind of aesthetic set of the characters. And we hoped with that there would be someone, like a character for basically everybody.
When the game officially released, they released it along with a second Creator Versus event, which was won by Ludwig, and released it for console and mobile as well as PC through Steam. However, despite these efforts, the official launch only started with around 65% of the Steam player base than it had on the open beta. While we don't have access to the numbers for console and mobile, it is likely that the official launch had overall more players than the beta, but the decline of players on the main platform, Steam, was concerning. There are a few suspected reasons for this decline in interest. The first is a combination of them exhausting large advertising and content outlets, such as Moist Critical, in the beta, and then having a large wait period afterwards. This is suspected to have exhausted the interest of a large number of potential players. Another reason would be the large amount of changes made to the game itself. The game underwent a large overhaul from the beta to the official release, and while it was regarded as an overall good change by the community eventually, there were many players that were against the changes at first. On release, Omega Strikers changed from the training system, which allowed you to choose a few power-ups in the menus that you would then enter the game with, into the Awakening system. The Awakening system is a draft system where at different points throughout the game, the players take turns based on their performance to choose from a list of available awakenings that give specific power-ups. This added another level of strategy to the game, and also added more variance. In addition, to win during the beta, all you needed to do was get to 5 points and also have a 2-point lead. On launch, this changed into a best of 5 sets, with each set being a best of 5 rounds, where in between each set is when the Awakening draft would take place. This led to games being longer, which at first a lot of players were not happy with when trying to climb up the competitive ladder. To alleviate this, the game also came out with a quick play mode, where all players are given the same set of awakenings randomly from a list of sets. In quick play, whoever gets 5 points first wins, and there are no awakening drafts, leading to much faster games. This mode was, however, only available for casual play. While this overhaul of the system must have been a lot of work, Odyssey was nowhere near done. After release, the game would see weekly balance updates, multiple large content updates every month, a steady supply of in-game events, a large Odyssey-sponsored tournament, and even their own VTuber mascot and announcer.
Just as a small studio, in like trying to actually even do the things that we thought were the baseline, like table stakes, you know, for the game, the things that had to be there. And so I think that that was one of the big challenges, was like, there was a lot more that we wanted to do for the game. There were many more features, many more characters, things like that we wanted to put in before we went into beta and then before we went into the full launch. But as a small team, you know, with like limited runway, we always thought that that was kind of the most risky thing that we could do, was just spending too much time on something that ultimately when we shipped it, players were like, oh, I didn't really care about that thing anyway. And then we miss the forest through the trees and don't end up seeing, you know, if the game is amazing or if the game has issues, because we spent too long cooking ourselves internally.
After every content update, there would be a spike in players, but sadly shortly after every spike, the player count would fall slightly lower to where it was before, leading to an overall decline of players. Despite Odyssey's best efforts, the game was dying. After only 6 months of the official launch, Omega Strikers had lost over 90% of its player base.
Our estimate was we would have needed somewhere around like 20,000 concurrent players, somewhere in the 10 to 20,000 range. Basically, as a studio, Omega Strikers is able to sustain itself and then just put a little bit back into the studio so we can also think about new things for the future. It's not like, you know, when the game launched, we were that far off of that, right? So I don't think that the position that the game ended up in is like all too surprising, like for the amount of CCU that it was able to have. But like the thing that we hoped was we could have had a bigger, you know, kind of peak at the beginning, and then the tail down would have been to that like 10 to 20,000 range. So I have to make something that's not crazy wild enough that like people can explain it to their friends, and they can explain it to their friends in a way where people are immediately like, oh, I get it. Like that's an exciting thing for me to get into. I think that that was kind of one of the challenges that we ran into with Omega Strikers. A lot of the times, even when we did our play testing, we'd find that people would say things like, I didn't think that this game would be for me, and then I played it and it's insane. Like I love it. Like this is my game. And
the dopamine receptors be wildin'.
Yeah. And I think that like that's just the, you know, for any other indie devs in the world, an interesting thing to think about, because you want to be unique, but you want to be unique in a way that people can easily share and explain the game to their friends, or else you kind of get in a loop that I feel like we ended up in a little bit, which was that the game was too hard for our like really passionate players to explain to a broad enough group to bring them into the game. And, you know, we really appreciate everyone who has done that, but it just seemed like it was a challenge at a level like a broad scale, you know.
With the game being released on mobile, along with console and PC, along with the unique playstyle of the game, most people considered it a casual game. Despite being a competitive game, it didn't draw in the competitive players. Since the majority of the player base was unable to see the skill involved when playing the game, they attributed winning or losing mainly to luck, which would make the game feel more repetitive due to the lack of understanding of just how much their actions could change each game they played. When players leave a competitive game, it has a sort of compounding effect. If gameplay is fast-paced, then you need to have region-based matchmaking in order for players to have a good experience. If a game is competitive, then it also needs to have skill-based matchmaking. This means whenever someone is trying to play a ranked game of Omega Strikers, the server has to find 5 other people that are somewhat nearby and also around the same skill level as that player. It also needs to be able to do that at any given time throughout the day. The more people stop playing, the harder it becomes to meet these criteria, and the longer players have to wait to find a match, which leads to more players leaving. Of course, if the developers make the rules for fitting these criteria more lenient, then the gameplay experience will be worse for the players. On November 3rd, Odyssey officially recognized the slow death of Omega Strikers, with a video announcement titled, "The Future of Omega Strikers." In this video, they go over some history with the game and company, and how the game hadn't been succeeding, and how they decided that they needed to move on. They explained that they would release a few more content updates, but by the end of 2023, they would stop development of Omega Strikers and focus on the future of Odyssey Interactive. While this announcement was very sad for everyone, it did come with quite a bit of hope. In this video, Odyssey promised to continue balancing the game and even to keep the servers running for as long as there were still people playing the game. And play the game people did. After the announcement, the player numbers stayed stable. There was the usual spike in players after each content update, but the numbers never went lower than they had consistently been. You could, and can, still find a game in under 5 minutes, unless you are within the top 100 or so players. But top players have trouble finding matches quickly in any game. Not only were there still people playing, but community-led tournaments kept firing. If anything, there were even more community tournaments and community engagement in general than there had been before. While Omega Strikers may not have broken through into the mainstream of modern competitive gaming, it did create a sizable and loyal player base that loves the game. When asked why they're still playing, almost every player responded that there just wasn't any other game like Omega Strikers. If at any point during this video you got interested in playing Omega Strikers, go ahead and give it a try. It's free for PC through Steam, on mobile, and on console. I would also recommend getting in touch with the community, they're pretty great. I'll link a few Discord servers in the description of the video. And don't worry, we aren't going anywhere. We'll be here playing Omega Strikers for a long time.
What can you tell us about the next project that you're working on?
They're games.